Hey everybody, welcome back to a fresh week and a fresh video. This week we're doing something a little different and a little special, and we're doing a podcast binge listen week. And so I'm back at my desk so I can show you the resource, which I have linked below this video in the show notes. So you can click that link and you can have a PDF delivered right to you via email. And what you're going to find in that PDF, I'm going to walk you through the whole thing, is that all of the links are live. I'm trying to take all of the hard work of digging around for information off your plate completely. I know as a librarian, which you've been hearing about a lot around here on this channel lately, that there is a lot of information and a lot of content. And it's hard as a consumer sometimes to have to figure out, well, what am I listening to? Where is it? I don't know how long it's going to be. I don't know who's talking. I don't know what to focus on. And so my goal this week is to show you how I've created a way for you to maximize your time, your energy, and your effort. Before I share my screen, don't forget this week to hit like, share, and subscribe on this video. It really helps me get more data about what you would like, which allows me to figure out what to focus on and what to bring you each and every week here on this channel. Thank you so much for watching me here on YouTube. I super appreciate your attention. And now let's get into the annotated podcast listener guide, which will help you with the School of Moxie podcast, but it's also set up to help you with every other podcast that you listen to. Welcome to the Season 1 listener guide for the School of Moxie podcast. I have some pages at the beginning to help you get more out of doing a binge listen week so that it doesn't just become more stuff that you consume, but you're actually binging in a way that helps you get answers to the questions that you're seeking. So there are just some guidelines here to help you along. We are going to make sure that we determine how much time and energy you have because, there's only so much we can do. And it's really important that if you don't have time right now, that you can always park this for later and you'll have the information and it's not going anywhere. I always recommend focusing on your hot topics of interest first. So I'm going to encourage you to go through this entire guide with me and earmark the topics that really jump out to you. Those are the ones you want to go to first. So you don't necessarily have to listen to something from cover to cover. And I know that's going to feel a little weird because in this podcast, I use television shows as a way to teach analogous reasoning and thinking. And so it might seem kind of weird to jump around among the episodes, especially if you haven't watched the whole show. But I'm here to tell you that it is 100% okay if you don't watch all the episodes. And it's also 100% okay if you don't finish the whole series. I really want you to look for your topics of interest. And if that encourages you to then go back and watch the TV show, then you can totally have fun with that, but it is not required. I also love encouraging my fellow listeners to listen to your favorite guests when you hear them speaking on 1x speed. It allows you to really soak them in and allows you to hear their natural cadence and actually understand what they're talking about. But if you're like, well, I have a couple of favorite speakers and the other people you're appreciating, but they're not necessarily your favorites, you can listen to those on 1.5 or 2x, depending on your personal listening abilities, if you're able to do that. Now, I always like to break things down into levels. The expert level, if you're going to go all the way, would be to watch the show and read the recommended book, and I'll show you where those resources are inside of this guide. And if you want to do the next level down and just be super advanced about it, I would recommend that you do watch the TV show for the source material because it will make a lot more sense. And then if you want to do the intermediate level, I would say you can shortcut all of that and watch the fan reaction videos, and you can get all the episode high points in sort of this like Cliff Notes version of the TV show. And I also have that link inside of this PDF, and I will show you where that is. Now, the same rules apply if you're going to get more out of any podcast. So we still want to determine how much time and energy you have. You will still want to focus on the hot topics of interest first. You always want to listen to your favorite people on 1x so you really hear what they are trying to tell you. And you can listen to the other things on a faster speed so you can just kind of get the information that you're looking for and move on. The expert expert level when you are listening to any podcast out there is to subscribe to the host and the guests' newsletters and opt-ins, whatever they're offering in the show notes. It gives you a way to get into their worlds and to start hearing more of the words that they use on a regular basis. And then if you want to go for the advanced level, you can create scheduled reflection time after listening to episodes that really get you thinking. So you make time and space for yourself to truly digest what it was that made you think, aha, or wow, or, oh, I really need to do that when you're listening to the episode. So you don't just blow past and then a few months later, you're like, man, I really wish I had taken time to try doing that method that person suggested. So we're going to make scheduled reflection time so that we're actually putting things into our project plan. And then at the intermediate stage, we're going to engage with the show notes and get the resources. We're not just going to listen and move on. Now, that's not true for every episode. Some episodes you'll listen to and you're not even going to hit the intermediate stage because you're like, well, it was interesting, or maybe the topic truly doesn't apply to you. And that is totally okay too. But I've given you these intermediate, advanced, and expert levels so that you can start to gauge your own behaviors and determine how well are you engaging with all the content that you consume. I know some people who consume everything on an expert level and they're feeling really burnt out right now. And I can't say I blame them. That is a lot of effort to put into every single thing. And frankly, there's just so much content out there. You kind of don't need to do it. You don't even need to do it with my podcast. There is always going to be one or two episodes or guests where whether it's the topic or the person speaking, and it just really speaks to you. And those are the ones you want to focus on. And what I want to encourage you to do through this PDF resource guide is to learn how to focus in that way. So our goal is no more content consumption on autopilot. We want to stop being on autopilot so that we can start getting more out of what we're doing. Because what happens when we go on autopilot too frequently is that our mental muscles actually atrophy and we end up with a much harder time digesting information. Things start taking longer. It's harder to absorb it and really utilize all of the good stuff that people are putting out there right now. So I've made you some cheat codes because season 1 of the School of Moxie podcast is based off of the TV show The Last of Us that was on HBO Max. And that show was based off of a video game. And in video games, we use cheat codes. So these are your cheat codes for engaging with podcast material. If you don't have the time or attention right now, you're going to wait until you do. It is okay to wait. And the reason why I've made this PDF guide for you is so that you can save it on your computer, or you can print it out, or you can bookmark the page in your browser, and you can come back to this and know that it's not going anywhere and that you'll have a guide to help you get back into the material when you do have the time and attention for it. And the other thing is that we prioritize the things that matter to us. So if you notice that your priorities are being usurped by something else that actually isn't a priority, then you want to rearrange your priorities so that you can give yourself time to focus on the things that you do want to focus on. Or maybe listening to podcasts right now just isn't a priority. You've got other things going on in life, and that's okay. Our priorities are going to constantly rearrange in our life, and it's really important that we make sure we are assessing that on a regular basis so we don't just say that this one thing is always a priority when it turns out it's not a priority anymore. And then the other thing that I really love recommending to my clients is to move your body and take a walk while you listen. I find for more people than not, this really helps. I teach my super woo-woo metaphysical clients to go for walks instead of sitting while meditating. Just find that we have so much time seated at our desks, at our computers, at a keyboard, and that we actually kind of need a little bit more movement. And it's a really great way to get in your steps every day. The other thing is, instead of multitasking, we really want to make sure we try and not do other mentally taxing activities. When we're trying to absorb what's going on in a podcast, we need to give ourselves time to listen, which is why I think if you need to get in some exercise, it's a great way to multitask that way. But if you're trying to say, write your email newsletter and listen to podcasts at the same time, you're never going to hear your own voice while you're writing your newsletter. And you're also not going to hear the voice of the person who's on the podcast. And you're just going to get like a double negative instance of anything productive going on there. So we want to stop doing that. And also, if you don't like something, stop listening to it. But as you know from a a recent video I posted here on my YouTube channel, my librarian trick for most content is to give something 2 to 3 episodes before you quit. Now, the one exception to this rule is if somebody expresses views that violate your boundaries and your values, you're just going to stop subscribing and stop listening. That is not worth your time to stick it out. There's so much content out there that you don't need to worry about missing out on anything. Here is our listener guide. Here's where you can do the same homework that all of our guests did for School of Moxie Season 1. What we did is we all watched the first season of The Last of Us on HBO. It's now been renamed Max.com if you're using the streaming service. We read a book by Susan Cain called Bittersweet, which we talk about every now and then on the podcast, but it's not the focus of the podcast, but it does provide us with language that we use for talking about bittersweet moments. Our guests also listened to the official The Last of Us podcast, and the link here will take you to the YouTube video version of the podcast, but you can also find that podcast on all of your major podcast apps. And then we also watched the behind the scenes extras for The Last of Us. And again, this link will take you to YouTube where all the extras are open for anybody to watch. They are also attached to each of the episodes when you're streaming the episodes on Max.com. And I call them the cheater notes. You can watch reaction videos. I love Johnny Odell's reaction videos. His channel is called J2O, and they're just really, really well done. And because you get to watch a truncated version of the episode while other people are watching it, you get a sense for what's going on. So if you find that it's a really intense show, which many of the podcast guests did, this is a great way to just feel like you're not watching it alone and you're, not going to be surprised by some of the more intense moments in the story. But I do want you to remember that this is your official spoiler alert. So if you like being surprised, you're probably going to want to watch the show first and then engage with the content. But you do not have to by any means in order to get a lot out of the episodes inside of this season of the podcast. What are the themes that we talked about this season? What I've done in your PDF guide is I've highlighted a concept, and they were truly the basis of forming the structure and the outline of the podcast season in general. In episode 1, this is a solo episode that I did. The concept is how to start things so that you can finish them. I see so many people not finish the things they start. And as a coach in business, it's probably one of the most frustrating things because I see people start amazing things and sometimes things get hard. And the whole basis of using The Last of Us for this podcast season was to drive home the point that we can finish hard things. This is a very intense show to watch. It's difficult emotionally to get through at times for many people. And by finishing the show, you're going to get a sense of completing something. So you're going to ask yourself, how do you set yourself up to succeed through completion points? Can you finish hard things or do you give up? And maybe if you've given up on something recently, this will help you get back into the start mode so you can complete it this year in 2024. In our next episode, we talked with Ashlyn Glazier Anderson, and the thing that we are looking at is your origin story and utilizing the power of authentic source material. So you're going to ask yourself, do you honor your sources and know your authentic materials? How deeply rooted is it in your business marketing? Renee Bowen had 2 episodes. We had 1 recording session, but we ended up talking longer on the mic. And so we split the episode in half. And this is what you see here. We released the first part of her episode in week number 1 for premiere week and the second half of her episode at the end of the season. We're talking about finding your inner strength to be seen in your business. And you're asking yourself in these episodes, do you see or avoid visibility and fame in your business and brand? How much do you run away from being seen? Renee and I talk a lot about this, and we talk about it through the celebrity aspect of the actors on this show and a lot of the press and hubbub and the fandom that went along with this particular title. Megan Graves also recorded with us this season. We talked about creating a thriving environment despite the chaos of our life and times. Unless you've been living under a rock, we've all been through a pandemic together, and this story touches on pandemic times, although it's extremely dramatic. So you're going to ask yourself, when you you listen to this episode, how do you handle changes and pivots? How can you become more resilient in your own business journey? And if you've been struggling with any of those things post-COVID, this is definitely going to be a great episode to help you start doing some of that processing and reflection. Sarah Allen Bauer hopped on the mic. We talked about nurturing your biz bestie relationships. So you're going to ask yourself in this episode, do you have biz besties that you rely upon? And how much do you show up for others as much as you want them to show up for you? Because that comes up in this episode a lot. I think this might be one of the fan favorites in the TV show itself because it's the Bill and Frank episode, but also among our podcast listeners. Lindsay's episode is one of the highest listened to episodes in the entire season. So if you have been trying to figure out how to articulate your big why, you'll also notice that we talk about who you do this for. So the question is, how strong is your big why in your business? Do you run out of juice? That was Lindsay's big question. Do you know who you do this for? And can that give you extra resilience as a result? So if you can't find the fire in your business or you run out of fire really, really fast, this is a must listen episode. Lots of people listen to this episode and haven't watched the show, and they've gotten so much from it. Also, one of our highest listened to episodes is Tanya Kubo's. We talked about developing your ethics and leadership in community management. This is a doozy of an episode, and it's really exciting. She and I talked about a lot of business gossip in this episode, and it was so juicy. We talked about what are your ethical boundaries and how do you uphold them. As online business becomes more mainstream, this is something we all have to think about and consider. And we talk about it from the perspective of you being the leader and also you experiencing other people's leadership. Beth Salyers got on the microphone with me. This was one of the super special episodes this season because we recorded this in the south of France in Nice during the summer. And we talked about surviving and thriving through persistent hardship, which I think is a really difficult thing to talk about. And Beth went to some very interesting places as an educator, and she had some great insights in this way. So the question you're going to ask yourself is, how can you handle unfairness in your business journey with strength and integrity? Because unfairness exists everywhere. But the question is how do we exist alongside it? How do we start making things better? Paya Robbins had one of the most special episodes this season. We talked about finding your community. The question is, do you have a safe space to freely be yourself in your business development? Where can you create a comfort zone? This is something that I think a lot of people are seeking right now in business. Communities and finding a really good one is a difficult thing to do. And Paya goes to some really vulnerable places, and it's a very special episode. Also super vulnerable and very honest is Madeline Reeves. We talked about staying strong by being honest in your true identity. Authenticity is this topic that just keeps coming up again and again. And we went to all those places in this episode, and Maddie dropped some really big truth bombs. So you're going to ask yourself in this episode, what brave actions can you take in your branding and your offers to be your true self, not the glossed over version of yourself, like you're airbrushing yourself for your brand, but the really true part of you. Are you free enough to be you? And then we ramped up the emotions to like 12 out of 10. And Eunice Brownlee got on the microphone. Eunice and I have had conversations in public about this before. And we took it onto the podcast. We talked about healing from abuse and coercive control through business coaching and communities. This is a really big topic that I only think is going to grow more and more. And I'm so thankful to Eunice for being willing to talk about this in a public forum. You're going to ask yourself in this episode, what kind of therapy or support do you need to recover from abuse in your business journey if you've experienced it? And in what ways will you protect yourself from future boundary violations? You're going to hear about all different ways that entrepreneurs are subjected to coercive control. Everything from pressure tactics and selling big coaching programs to people, all the way to communities that are not ethically managed and allow abusive practices to happen within those spaces. This season could not be complete without inviting my dear friend and woo bestie, Erica Corday, onto the microphone. Erica is an expert in holding difficult conversations with people, and she teaches us how to navigate those and also unresolved endings. This is not too big of a spoiler on this season of The Last of Us. The ending of the first season feels very unresolved to pretty much everybody who watches it. She just kept dropping one truth bomb after another. I just let her talk, and so we had to split this episode into two. We really dove into this big question for yourself. When has something difficult gone unresolved in your business journey? And more importantly, what did it teach you about yourself? Because the one thing that you can control and that you can grow with is yourself. And that's where we bring everything back home. I was so thrilled to have Stephanie Ayers join me on the mic. Stephanie is an expat, and we recorded in the south of France, and we talked about making space for the bigger picture. As a marketing strategist, this is Stephanie's main wheelhouse. So we asked ourselves on the mic, do you make regular space and time to reflect in your business? And what dots can you connect when you do this? We look at the business of entertainment, we look at the business of business, and we really start to draw a whole complete picture around the podcast season. So it's not just about the podcast, it's about the bigger picture around it. We rounded out the season in a couple of ways. The first one is a solo episode with me, your host, and we talked about analogous reasoning, strategy, and techniques. I find that analogies are one of the best ways to work through really hard things in our businesses. So you're going to ask yourself in this episode, can you find the fun in your business and bring joy back into your journey? Because a big part of the analogy part of this podcast is watching something fun, watching a TV show, doing something that's very non-businessy and making it a part of your business. Last but not least, this is the second part of wrapping up this season of the podcast. I have these 2 episodes parked here for all of my production people. We talked about producing content in your business for marketing and growth. I have another solo episode about how I crafted a podcast journey for this first season. And then my sound engineer, who is amazing, the fabulous Chris Martin, also got on the microphone with me, and we talked about our behind the scenes process collaborating together. What I love that came out of the conversations in these last 2 episodes is, do you allow yourself to create your best vision in your branding activities? How can you allow yourself to go beyond minimum viable? I made a really big point about going way beyond minimum viable in this first season. We're going to do it again in the second season. And I think it's really important when you are not a beginner anymore to start thinking about, how do you elevate this to make yourself stand out? And when you are a beginner, how do you look down the road ahead and prepare to go beyond minimum viable so you're not surprised by the cost and the effort and the labor? If you want to keep in touch with me, these are all the different ways that you can stay subscribed to me. You're watching this here on YouTube, so you can hit subscribe right here. And you can also subscribe for email alerts, which is one of the best ways that I release super duper early bird information. And you can listen to the podcast in any of your favorite podcast apps. And that link to find your app is right here at the bottom. I hope that the annotated guide helps you engage with the School of Moxie podcast in a way that is a lot more strategic and impactful and frankly faster to use and to get the information that you're looking for. I'll bet that when you listen to all those different topics, there is at least one in there you're like, I've really been thinking about that, or I've been struggling with that, or I want to go deeper into that. And I encourage you to go and do that. In the meantime, don't forget to share, like, and subscribe on this channel. You can share the podcast with your friends by sharing this link with them. I can't wait to bring you season 2. We are going to be back in the summer of 2024 this year. We're going to be using Ted Lasso as our show for season 2. I'm super excited about it. In the meantime, I'll see you back here on YouTube. Remember to be sensible, be woo, and always, always, always be you.